Well, your values are given. What you bring to the table are your skills, your capacities, your capabilities, and you apply them in the environment. Your value doesn't change. So a really good metaphor is like a gold ring. That you can focus on your shininess, you can focus on your ability to hold a beautiful diamond, you can focus on your shape, your ability to fit a finger, you can focus on all of that. But at the end of the day, you get a mallet, whack a ring, burn, heat it until it becomes a lump of gold, and you know what? It's worth exactly the same as it is in the ring shape. And so,
Yeah.
and so the realization that I like to get across is you're the gold, not the ring.
On today's episode with my guest, Jay Hedley, you're going to learn how you adopt the language of success. And Jay explains how you can change the language that you use, the language you use in your mind, your self-talk, how you share your message to the world. Change that message, change that language to change your life. He also has some really interesting stuff, which you'll hear more about how you create more power in your life. Now, like you, Jay's been a child, a parent, a partner, a friend, a work colleague in sport. He's also worked with some of the biggest names in the sporting landscape across the world. Let's get into it. I'm Ian Hawkins, and this is Sport is Life. The purpose of sport, as I see it, is to see your vision become a reality. Find your voice, create strong connections, and learn to trust your body. Welcome, Jay. How are you?
Very well, thank you. And lovely to be here.
Great to have you. Another Normanhurst Boys alumni. Thank you for coming on and sharing your story.
No problem at all. Yeah, that was a while ago. So me and Normanhurst Boys didn't particularly go very well together. So we didn't leave on great terms.
It's selective now, so I won't speak for you, but I'm not sure I would have qualified if that was the case.
It started to be more and more selective as I was leaving. So, but it didn't. The focus that they had on just really harsh corporal discipline just didn't fit for me, and I was quite a sensitive kid, and I didn't respond very well to being caned and all that sort of thing. So in the end, I just said, look, you guys go the way you're going. I'm going to go in a different direction. Thanks. But look, there was some. I enjoyed the people that I grew up with, and I'm still in contact with a few of them. So
yeah, very cool. And that discipline is how I remember going into that, because I was just discussing before we hit record. I went to Normo probably 2 years after you'd finished. That was sort of coming to an end, I think, that era, but there was certainly some of that.
So it should have. It was very wrong. They were cane happy back there, and you only had to drop a swear word and bang, in there, line up, wait for your six of the best. It's like, what?
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, I do a bit of work in school environment at the moment, and thankfully it's a very different environment.
Yes.
There's no way we could have kept going down that path. I do think that probably an element of discipline, but through a different lens, is definitely required, and it comes back to the word boundaries, I think. But anyway, won't get too far into that territory. I'd love to know how you go from someone who's been in school environment that didn't particularly work, you described just then, to doing the work that you're doing now around high performance.
Yeah.
Where does your journey take you off the back of school then, if school wasn't the answer?
Look, I think it actually led me in a strange and funny kind of way. I think it led me to start to investigate my own, spirituality, and I'm not talking religion. I'm talking, my spiritual understanding of what is of prime importance to me, and really, I began to go in the direction of reading a lot of self-help sort of books, and looking at those sort of programs and courses, I did a few of them when I was in my late teens. My dad was very supportive of that. Having going through that at the same time, and I was really interested in it. And then a friend of mine got right into NLP, neuro linguistic programming, in the 80s, and I wasn't interested in it then. And I chased it in the 90s, and I did a bit in the 1990s, and then I come back and I found it again by doing a practitioner course in the early 2000s, and that's where it all really began. When I was in sales management, working for a company called AAPT, or Telecom New Zealand, bought them by then, and I was in doing some management programs and met an NLP trainer, and I really liked the way she trained, and I found her quite different. And I had a very good conversation. I said, "Well, look, I've done some NLP in the 90s, not a great deal, but probably a week's worth, and I really thought it was great." She said, "Look, why don't you just come along and do our practitioner course?" She said, "I'll give it to you at half price." And I thought, well, why not? So I went and did it, and I fell in love. I immediately went home and spoke to my wife and said, "This is what I want to do for the rest of my life." And so that was the journey. I did the master practitioner, and then I did some coach training programs, the Meta Coach training system with a guy called Michael Hall. Then I went and chased down. We got involved in the integral framework, which was developmental psychology, and we went. Both my business partner and I went and did some work with Integral Coaching Canada, who were the leading, and possibly still are worldwide, the leading integral theory coach training system. And that was really good, but they missed NLP. We noticed that the students there couldn't ask meta modeling questions, which are questions that change ambiguity into specificity, and they couldn't do that. And both Joseph and I thought, well, that's the missing piece, is understanding the NLP communication model and how our mind works. Understanding that allows us to understand particularly linguistics, and with that linguistic background of NLP, we could see how NLP could marry very, very closely and kind of complete the picture with integral theory. And then we got into integral and Ken Wilber's stuff, and we've been studying that. We've been working with developmental psychologists all around the world for the past sort of 10, 15 years, and bringing NLP and developmental psychology together under a single banner, and form that approach to coaching. And now we train coaches in what we call integral coaching, and our integral coaching program, which is pretty comprehensive. It takes about 2 or 3 years to get through, but it outputs, very, very good coaches, very skilled coaches.
Awesome. I did my NLP about 2013. Similarly, you describe as like, wow, this is where has this been? We'll get to it at the end, but you've got an offer for people who are curious, and as a coach myself, I can highly recommend listening to that.
Who did you do it with? Do you remember?
So Rebecca, what was her maiden name? She worked with Inspirative, Inspirative.
Very good trainers. No Inspirative, and have there's very few trainers that actually know what they're doing with NLP. Inspirative are one of them. They come from the John Grinder side. Very, very skilled trainers they are, and they do a big long form diploma of NLP, and one of the only ones in Australia that do. So they're very, very good. More academic NLP than vocational, but good.
Yeah, that was what I found too. And I watch a whole lot of people out there in the life coaching and business coaching space that talk about NLP. You can tell the ones that have done the training with those sort of people. You described it before, and I'm curious to know what the difference was, because that's what I found too. It was different. It was more. It was less about making it about the facilitator. I know that's meant to be the intention of NLP, but it's not always the case, as you know. But what I found with the Inspirative program, it was very much about allowing the person you're working with to drive the outcome. And
client does the work. Absolutely.
Yeah. So when you first came across NLP, what what, because you mentioned a few times, you're like, oh, wow, this is amazing how you said, this is what I want to do. What was it specifically that grabbed you, that had you wanting to really take on more of it and actually make it something a big part of not just your business, but your life?
The power of linguistics and meaning. So how meaning drives our performance, and how language both does and doesn't matter. It matters because we pack it full of semantics, and semantics means meaning. It's semantic. Our words are semantically loaded, and we bring the semantics, we bring the meaning to our words. And by just shifting, seeking to understand the meaning that has been constructed, and just shifting the frame, finding where the leverage is in the meaning structure, shifting the frame completely transforms the game so quickly and completely, that it's like watching magic occur. That we are neurology, semantic meaning beings, and so we get meaning works its way into our neurology, and meaning can make us healthy, meaning can make us sick. So understanding how we construct and apply meaning is seminal to changing the nature of mindset.
Love that. The phrase that I'm sure it was Les Brown used, language is the software of the mind.
Yep.
And you change the software, you change your mind, you change the results that you get.
Sure.
You also mentioned how language makes us sick, and I think back to growing up, I remember hearing my mum say, oh, you don't get sick, like you've only had one sick day in all of school and all these sorts of different things, and then that becomes the habit, the pattern that you carry forward. It doesn't mean that if you heard a different pattern you can't change it, right? Which to me is one of the great parts of being able to change language, whether it's through NLP or using another modality, to be able to change the story, change the lens, change the data, and change the results. So
Absolutely.
how can you think of a great personal example that you were able to change yourself through? Because to me, one of the greatest gifts of learning how to be the facilitator is what it actually gives you in that training, all the realizations you have about self. Was there something that really stuck out for you?
Look, my personality structure is a strong personality structure. It's a very independent personality structure. I think Normo Boys helped that. It helped me create my own structure in response to what I thought was unfair, and what I experienced as wrong. I decided that I wasn't going to let people push me around anymore. And with that strength of personality structure came a lot of anger for me. And I grew up a very frustrated and an angry young man. And I racked my brain to try and figure out what's going on. Why am I angry?
Yeah.
And I thought it was drinking alcohol. So I stopped drinking alcohol for 6 months, but I was still angry, so I kept drinking. So it made no difference whatsoever. And so I with NLP, I began to look at what are the frames that I'm holding about myself, what are the frames I'm holding about reality, what are the expectations I'm applying to reality that create the anger and frustration from an inside out perspective. And I began to find frames that people were out to get me, life's unfair. I began to find these frames. I began reframing them, and my anger started to fall away and dissipate to, now I really very rarely use anger. But if I do use anger, it's with intentionality, because in that moment it's required. So, if someone wants to attack me, anger's a very powerful response. So, if someone wants to attack you and you go at them, from an angry psycho, they're gone. So it can be very, very useful, can save a life, but used inappropriately, it can be socially very damaging. It can cause a lot of personal pain and sickness and suffering. Anger is not great for your organs. It is not great for your blood pressure. It's not great for your health. And so working through my own anger structures, and they were built around expectations of how reality should be. And the big one was I expected reality to bend to my will. That was the big one I discovered. And I was like, what the hell? What?
Yeah.
That doesn't make any sense. So I began to release myself from those expectations. My anger just began to dissipate. And, I had it rather than it having me.
Love that. That's huge. And the word that you used that I find when I'm working with young athletes, which we were going to talk about today, is that the sense of when things are unfair, whether it's during the game, whether it's results, whether it's just day-to-day life. Like
Yeah.
often if I'm working with a young athlete, it's not as much on the actual game as it is about how they're navigating the rest of it. And that sense of unfairness that comes up with teachers, with parents, with everything, it's huge. So what if because I know you work with some fairly high profile young athletes, what is it that, or how would you go about helping them to reframe that sense of unfairness? Because I imagine it's different for every
Yeah.
individual as well, but there must
Yeah.
be sort of overarching pattern to it.
Yeah. So it's a conversation around power versus influence, and to help them understand where their power is and where their power isn't. And so in our world, you have control over four things and only four things. The rest is influence. And so you have power over what you think. That is the movies that you make in your head.
Yep.
Yeah. So you've got visual movies, you've got auditory or sound bite based movies, you've got kinesthetic feeling based movies, and you've got self talk. So they're the kind of aspects of they're the aspects of thinking. So you can control your thinking, what the movies that you play in your head. For example, I'll have an athlete stand up, put their arms out, and I'll have them access for themselves a single one-time event when they were on fire, when they were absolutely knocking it out the park. And I take them back and I say, see what you saw, hear what you heard, and feel what you feel. Now, as you go back there, notice what you were seeing. Notice if there was any smells, notice if there was any tastes in your mouth, notice what you were hearing, notice. And as you replay that event, and you replay the difference that made it a powerful event, and I hold their arms up and I push down and I go, resist me pushing your arms. And so now I push their arms and they can resist. And then I say, okay, so stop, break, state, what'd you have for breakfast? And they'll tell me about what they had for breakfast. And then I'll have them now go into a movie in their mind where they put their arms out, where they tanked, where they stuffed up royally, where they really, really had a bad day on the job. And I have them go back and do the same thing, see what they saw, hear what they hear, feel what they feel, notice what made it really bad, and notice what feeling they're getting as they play that movie. And then I have them resist, and I push their arms, and their arms, I can get them right down by their side. And then I turn them around and I go, what'd you learn? And they go, holy crap, the movies I make in my head drive the power of my physical performance. I had no idea. And so I'll say to them that you get to control the movies, right? So that's the first thing you get to control. The second thing is that your movies in your head drive your emotional experience. So your emotions aren't driven from what's happening in the world. You can't control what's happening in the world. You can only control what you think about what's happening in the world and the emotions that it creates. So you can control your thinking, your movie making. You can control your emotions through your movie making. Your movies ground and coded by your emotions. So the movies that you run drive your emotional experience. They're your two personal powers. Yeah, you have power over those. They're your private and personal powers. They're your inner game powers.
Yep.
You then have two outer game powers. What you say, that is what you communicate verbally, non-verbally. So your communication is what you have power over. and what you do, your actions and your behaviors. So they're your external powers, they're your outer game powers, they're your public powers, if you like. So as an athlete, you have power over what you think and feel about what's happening and what you say and do about what's happening. That's where your power lies. So your focus must be on those four things, because you don't have power over anything else. You don't have power over your computer, whether it works or doesn't work. You don't have power over other people. You don't have power over the weather. You don't have power over the umpire or the referee. You don't have power over the opposition. You don't even have power over your teammates. You have influence. But the way you get influence is by taking ownership and responsibility of your four powers. When you do that, you begin to influence the world, you begin to influence people, you begin to influence your environment, but only because you're taking responsibility for those four things. So we have that conversation, and then I ask them to then translate that to some events out in the field, out on the courts, out on the racetrack. I have them then go, well, where could you use this? And we start to talk through some examples and start to make it really real and grounded and concrete for them.
Yeah, so good. And what sort of struck me from the language you were using is like you get your power back when you were focusing on the things that
you take it back.
Yeah,
you take
so
ownership
good.
of it, and so then you can have more influence, because you can influence through people through the words you use. So you can influence the umpire or the referees. You can influence the crowd through your actions. You can influence your teammates by leading by example. You can influence the other side by putting them under pressure. But you've got to be taking responsibility when you're doing that for your four powers, and that's what gives you the influence.
Yeah, so the responsibility for self has to come first.
Must.
Yeah, so good.
So focus on what you can control, let go of what you can't.
Yeah, and that's a huge one. You mentioned there about they're having a physical response, and you've already described a few times how the body holds onto the different stories and so on. But I love that description, because what it does is it shows not just through the thoughts that they had, but physically how it takes away their power. It made me like think about muscle testing that you do in kinesiology or anything like. Can you share a little bit about the psychology of that part of it? Because I know sometimes people, like when they hear this sort of stuff, it doesn't make sense until you've experienced it. From my experience, you need to experience some sort of muscle testing or what you described then to fully get an appreciation. But given that you do this all the time and you've seen the reaction, like how would you describe what the body's actually doing there?
So the inner game drives your outer game experience, and so where your power is in the inner game, and how it translates into the outer game experience, how your thoughts and feelings and emotions are grounded in your physical being, and how they influence your physiology, and how that physiology plays out here in relationship to its environment. And so the inner game leads the outer game. So it's an inside out process, not an outside in process. And I think it's the biggest shift for most coaches, that when sports coaches, not mindset coaches, but proper sports coaches, when they get that, it's not outside in, it's not the performance that leads the mindset, it's the mindset that leads the performance, and then the performance starts to influence the mindset, and then the mindset starts to re-influence performance. But we can get lots of leverage and traction by understanding, what are the frames we're bringing, inner frames, to our outer game, and those frames are belief frames. Well, firstly, they're thoughts. Then they become beliefs, then they become values, then they become principles, they become part of your identity, and then they become part of your purpose. And so all of those structures and helping coaches and athletes really understand how our intentionality works, that energy flows where your attention goes, as governed by your intention. and you know, most people don't know what their intention is. I'll say to them, "What's your intention here?" And they'll say, "To win." And I'll say, "Well, that's a like a very manana intention. Everybody wants to win. So what?"
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but what is important to you about winning? Why does it matter? Why is it meaningful? How do you want to win? Not just whether you win, how do you want to win? And what's that about? What does it say about you as a human being? And so they begin to discover and realize that they're being run by previous, less mature intentions that were set back either in childhood, in relationship to their parents, or were set, you know, frames that were set in relationship to events that occurred to them that now play out as beliefs and values and identity structures. And so those are what we call prior intentions. It's understanding how those prior intentions are running us and then quality checking them until we can understand whether they're serving us or not. And if they're not serving us, resetting those intentions so that they're really clear on not only what they're about, but what's important to them and why that matters to them. When they've got that, they have conscious intentionality, then energy flows through the system to attend to the things that align with the intention.
Such a great description. And I love how you talked about that being the future for particularly sports coaches, because
Yeah.
I often, I don't know if frustrated is a word, but I look at when I hear players or sometimes coaches after the game and they talk about, oh, we'll have to just get back and work harder.
Yeah.
And it's like, but on what? Like, because often it's like they're just going to keep like trying to push the boundaries of the physical capabilities. But as you described there, it's like the inner game drives the outer game.
Yeah.
And that's my belief too, is that this is a real future shift. And thankfully it seems to be accelerating. And if you don't prioritize it, you're going to get left behind in that space.
Well, yeah. So I see a lot of coaches, even at the highest levels, I see a lot of coaches who believe that mentality is driven by behaviors. So I was listening to One-on-One with Justin Langer after he had resigned from the Australian coaching gig with Barry Cassidy, the man who has, you know, more wrinkles on his forehead. There's people trapped in there, I'm sure. An amazing interview, and Barry asked him, you know, about the culture of the team. And, you know, Justin Langer said, well, culture's just behaviors. And I thought, what? Like, what? Culture's behaviors? No wonder that, you know, Sandpaper Gate, it was like with a frame like that, culture is behaviors, is a complete and utter misunderstanding of how culture works. Culture's got nothing to do with behaviors. Behaviors are an expression of the culture. But a culture is really born of the unspoken norms that are allowed to exist during events that people interpret on a collective basis. Culture is about the quality of the unspoken relationships that occur. Culture, so, you know, in the 1950s, there was a anthropologist and a zoologist came together and decided to create an experiment with blue gorillas. And there was a bunch of blue gorillas in the zoo. And so they took the head gorilla, the big, and they put the gorilla into a big cage, and they put a set of stairs leading up to a big bunch of bananas, one of the gorilla's favored treats. And so the gorilla climbed the stairs, ripped in, started whacking some bananas down. Unbeknownst to the gorilla, there was a massive fire hose with a zookeeper on the end of it that sprayed him off of the stairs and into the corner, and you know, then you know, kept on it for a bit and then stopped, and the gorilla, you know, dusted itself off and climbed back up the stairs, and again the hose came, and it did it 3 or 4 times until about the 4th time it decided, that's it, I'm not climbing the stairs, the pain's too much for the pleasure.
Yeah.
So they brought in the second gorilla, the second lead gorilla, who looked at the first gorilla and thought, what's going on with him? Climbed the stairs, got some bananas. He got a hosing, but so did the first gorilla for his actions. And
Wow.
so when he went to climb the stairs, the first gorilla went, oh, no, you're not going up those stairs. They had a brawl, and the second gorilla decided, oh, I'm not going to climb those stairs again. So they both sat there looking at each other, wet, wringing wet, looking at the bananas, but not doing anything. They took the first gorilla out. They put a third gorilla in. The third gorilla climbed the stairs. It got a hosing. The second gorilla got a hosing. When the third gorilla went to climb, the second gorilla stopped it. They took the second gorilla out, put a fourth gorilla in. When the fourth gorilla went to climb the stairs, the third gorilla stopped it. Now, the fourth gorilla had no idea why. And so they took the third gorilla out. They put a fifth gorilla in. When the fifth gorilla went for the stairs, the fourth gorilla stopped it. And neither of them knew why. That's culture. So culture is based on past experiences and meaning made by those past experiences that are largely unconscious. And so those meanings, those shared meanings, are what comprise culture. The culture then drives behaviors, it drives individual attitude, it drives systems, processes, and environment. But those are expressions of culture. They are not culture.
Yeah, it also struck me.
That's a really good example of how people think things like culture are outside in, and they're not. They're actually inside out. They might have occurred because of what occurred in the environment, but it's how we make meaning about what occurred that creates the shared environment, that creates the shared culture, the shared understandings, the shared meanings.
So good. And what struck me was how movements can get going in one direction, good or bad. Like people who are on this cause that may have some great merit, but there might be other causes that are like people are looking, how have they all been brainwashed by that? But you just described how quickly it can happen when the person leading it is forceful enough. Then yeah, very interesting. The two words that came to mind when you were describing that were two words that you mentioned before when you talked about the beliefs and how things can change, and that they were values and purpose. And when you want to be able to then change culture, they're two powerful ways that you can actually create a shift. Because, and I guess what you described there with the gorillas is kind of like you knew the purpose for stopping the person going up the gorilla up to the up the stairs, and I guess from a animal kingdom perspective, the values is around primarily safety, I guess.
Yeah.
Whereas for humans, we complicate values in a far broader and more complicated way.
Well, values are biases, like beliefs are biases. So, and our biases become filters that filter our reality. And so they filter in information and they filter out information by the bias itself directs our attention. So energy flows where intention goes is governed by intention. So that energy flows toward meeting the bias. So biases seek to confirm themselves. That's why people get caught up in movements, because their biases look to confirm themselves. That's what your beliefs are doing. Beliefs are the same thing. Beliefs are biases, which means that they look for information that confirms and they discredit information that doesn't confirm the belief. So whether you do or whether you don't, you're right.
Yes.
Whether you believe it or whether you don't believe it, you're right.
Yeah. And that,
if you don't
very much.
You're going to look for information that confirms that. If you do believe it, you're going to look for information that confirms that. But organizations like Facebook know that, and so they use biases very cleverly to send information that meets the bias of what it thinks you're looking for based on what you've searched.
Which comes back to the belief is that it's being curious and not too connected to one way of thinking, to one belief. Be open to that there's a different belief or possibility or fact in inverted commas out there that may change your current belief, because then you can
Well, yeah,
navigate those sort of scenarios in a different way. It made me think of the description I heard, leading up to US elections. You can look at two different feeds, and one will be all blue, one will be all red,
yeah,
and no wonder they can't see eye to eye, because they're getting exactly that. They're getting that confirmation
absolutely.
bias, which is fueling what they already believe.
Yeah,
And as
absolutely.
you say,
And
those
and
business
then
risks.
the meta belief is that you start to believe your beliefs. Now that's fundamentalism. Now that belief locks all the other beliefs in, and now
Mm.
the confirmation bias will just delete, distort, and generalize all information in alignment with those beliefs.
Yeah. So if we bring that back to a sporting context,
Hmm,
how do we then shift the dial there, where whether if we're a coach, where we get
hmm.
everyone pulling in the direction of what we actually want in terms of not necessarily results, but how we are measuring success as a team outside of wins and losses, but what we're actually wanting to achieve. What's the purpose of what we're doing? How do we want to do it? How do we want to carry ourselves?
Yeah. So there's a couple of things that really stand out there for me. So number one is the differences between confidence and esteem. That's the first one, because confidence is about belief, and separating the two. And the second one is to go beyond belief. So a lot of coaches use beliefs to say that you got to believe. Yeah, Ted Lasso
Yeah.
style. You got to believe.
Yeah.
And really, beliefs are the structures that actually get in the way, because a belief, the formation of belief is an early stage of development structure. They're necessary, but they're not sufficient. So they're necessary. They're necessary for discipline. They're necessary for growth. They're necessary for honing, and directing. They're necessary for young people. So beliefs and values act as a greenhouse. They act as a greenhouse to provide an environment. But those beliefs will end up holding us back. The way if you grew an oak tree in a greenhouse, eventually the oak tree is going to get to the top of the greenhouse, no matter how big the greenhouse is, and it's going to either push through it, or it's going to be retarded by it. It's going to be held back by it. And so
Yep.
if you dismantle that greenhouse, which has served its purpose, it's grown the oak tree up, provided a beautiful environment for growth and development, a nurturing, supporting environment, but it's not an environment for thriving, and it's not an environment for ultimate potential. And so going beyond belief is really having athletes test beliefs, to test, well, what's beyond that? And what's the possibility beyond that belief? And how would you put it to the test? How could you actually test it to get past confirmation bias, to learn whether the belief's actually serving you or the belief's starting to hold you back? Because all beliefs in time will eventually hold you back. As you grow, they don't grow with you. They will start to become structures that hold you back. And so beliefs have got, athletes have got to go beyond belief. And I mean, Roger Bannister was a classic experience of that,
Yeah.
that, we didn't believe we could run the 4-minute mile. Roger, he believed that belief was wrong, and that belief needed to be tested and could be broken. Within days of Roger breaking through that belief, another one, another one, another
Yeah.
one, another one, another one, another one, another one. The records were being tumbled because all of a sudden people broke through the belief that it's not possible.
Yeah. So
And
good.
so Roger tested the belief. He didn't believe in it. He looked at it and said, how can I test whether this is possible? What do I need to do? How do I need to approach this in a different way to test whether that belief is real or accurate or not?
Yeah.
But
And
the second thing is confidence versus esteem. People mix them up. And so to confide in yourself is to believe in yourself. and it is belief in a skill. And so confidence should go up and should go down as a skill goes up, and as a skill declines, belief or confidence should go up and down to meet it. You don't want to go to a doctor who's overconfident. You don't want to go to a doctor who's underconfident. You want to go to a doctor, if they're going to perform brain surgery on you, for example, that has a very high level of confidence, because they have the skill that meets their confidence. You don't want that confidence tracking ahead or behind their skill. Yeah. And so it is. It should rise and it should fall with skill, so that you don't want a doctor that's overconfident. No worries, it'll be fine. Yeah, we'll cut in, we'll rip it out. Nah, you'll be tickety-boo. Only to wake up and find you can't speak. We don't want to build a doctor that's like, am I doing the right thing? I mean, is it like, we want someone who has high level of confidence matched with skill. Esteem or self-value, on the other hand, should not go up and down. That our humanity is a given. Our value is a given. It's built into our humanity. Do you have kids, Ian?
I do, yeah.
Yeah. Do you remember holding one of your children in your crook of your arm for the very first time?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Frightening.
But it's a miracle, is it not? That you're holding this extraordinary being. But here's the interesting thing: that being can't do anything, can't say anything, can't own anything, according to the values that we hold about ourselves, is valueless. But yet we know it's the most valuable thing on the planet. Even it can eat, wee, poo, cry, sleep. That's about it. And so yet we align our own self-value with what we do, so that when the doing goes up and down, the sense of self goes up and down. It's like us attaching our sense of self to what we do is attaching our esteem to our confidence, and that's dangerous. And so like, a baby is the most valuable thing on the planet, and it can't do anything. And so we know its value is inherent. We know that value is a given. That's you. That's me. We're that value. So our value doesn't go up and down. It's stable and it's unconditional. When that happens, the skill level can go up and down, and the confidence level can go up and down in alignment with the skill. That's healthy. But when our value stays solid in the face of winning or losing, in the face of good, bad, fair, unfair, when our value stays stable, those become learning experiences. Those become developmental.
It's such a great analogy to describe that. Looking at the baby, the one I use is often around the baby learning to walk. And I talked before about sporting parents. What did we say when they're at that level? We're not screaming at them to do better. We're not
what kind of walker are you? Get up and walk. Come on. Of course we don't. We're encouraging. It's a process.
Yeah, exactly right. Encouraging in process, and that's exactly where it comes from when I'm talking to sports parents. Is like, how do you think you would be reacting if you were in your workplace and someone's yelling at you, trying to make you perform better the way you're actually yelling at the moment?
Yeah. Well, it's what we call the difference between outcome thinking and process thinking.
Yeah.
That where athletes go to high levels of performance is they stop watching the scoreboard and they start focusing on the process. And the way that I developed that model was when I worked with Waratahs Rugby, for example, when I remember one of their players come off and he'd had a blinder of a game, they had put the Rebels to the sword. I think we beat them 57-28. And in the second half, we just annihilated them. And he came off and I said to him, let's say he was Bob, I said, hey, Bob, mate, what a game. What happened out there? And he said, I don't know, I can't remember. And I said, what do you mean you can't remember? And he said, well, it was like 1 minute we were kicking off and for the second half, and the next minute the hoodoo was going, and I was like, what? And I went, well, that's flow.
Yeah.
And he said, yeah. And I said, where was your sense of self? And he said, there wasn't any. And I said, where was your sense of time? And he said, there wasn't any. And I said to him, well, where was your sense of what was happening on the scoreboard? And he said, I had there was no recollection of the scoreboard. I was lost. He said this, I was lost in the process. And so well, there's process thinking. And then outcome thinking is observing the scoreboard because you're worried about the outcome, means you're not engaging in the process. And it's the same for a child. That a child doesn't fall over. I might cry, but they don't go, I'm an idiot, I'm a moron, how could I have done that? I'm homeless, I'm never gonna walk. They just pull themselves up and they try again. And they fall over, they might have a bit of a cry, but you know what? A minute later, they're back up, wobbling on that couch, pulling themselves up, wanting to take a step again. They don't have the critical mindset. They're in the process. They're lost in it. The same happens for an athlete. When that occurs, high performance occurs.
Yeah, it made me think of what I heard Ange Postecoglou saying recently. He got caned a fair bit in the press when they were down to 9 men and he was still playing the same process. And he said, like, we're taking the scoreboard off of it. And he's looking long term. He wants long term success for that club, and he wants them to be getting out of that mentality of
absolutely. Now that's it. Now he's a good coach.
Oh, absolutely, because he knows that sort of thing. And why I wanted to mention Ange is because he talks in his story a lot about the impact of his dad. You mentioned your dad briefly before. I imagine if what he was getting himself involved in, it was beneficial that your dad had a fairly impactful part in your journey. Was it from a place of like inspiring you because of a number of different things he was doing, or was it from different challenges, or was it a combination of both?
My dad, very like 2 weeks ago, passed away, and I was at his bedside. He had dementia, and he went unconscious, and then passed. He'd been bedridden with a broken hip for a year, and so it was a miracle that he lived as long as he lived. But as he was passing, and I had my hand on his head, I had a realization about what my dad was about, and in the service, I came up. I like to make up words because I like to play with language. Yeah. And the word that came up for me was agental. And agental means an agent of gentleness. And he was just an incredibly gentle human being. And that was an inspiration, that he had a very gentle way of understanding things and looking at the world and seeing the world. It's not that he wasn't fierce. He definitely was fierce. But, you know, he hated thugs, he hated violence, he hated war, he hated all that. He didn't hate it against it, but he didn't like it and spoke out against it quite openly, and said, you know, we need to find a much better way. And so that level of gentleness that I experienced through him is really what has impacted me. And it impacted me to shed myself of the anger and frustration and rallying against the world that I did as a younger man, to become a more caring, connecting, people-centered, coach and leader. That has been the center of my evolution. And I think that's been the greatest impact he's had upon me.
Yeah, wow. Thank you for sharing, and I didn't know that was where I was going to head. It sounds like it, he'd been having ongoing struggles. So I was going to use the word heartbreaking, as I think it is when anyone passes. It sounds like you're in a better position to deal with it. I imagine you've had to process a fair bit over his journey of illness.
Yeah. I mean, for me, that death of a parent really has me look at my own mortality.
Yes.
And the realizations I've had over the past year of being with him as he's going through the process of end of life, has been the understanding that death makes life meaningful. and that life only exists because of death, and death only exists because of life, and they're both part of a process. And for me, seeing that within myself has meant that I realize that each of us has a finite number of heartbeats, and it's not money and it's not time that is the greatest currency, it's heartbeats. And what I do with athletes and coaches is I get across to them the understanding that by focusing on something, they're giving their heartbeats to it. And is the exchange worth it? Is the exchange of getting caught up in the bullshit that people get caught up in their mind about this or that, is it worth the exchange of heartbeats? Because you can't get them back. And so how you're spending your heartbeats, I'll often say when people get caught in a looping in their mind, how you spending time in your heartbeats? Is this a good way of you expressing your heartbeats? And they start to realize that, all right, my mortality is meaning, and meaning matters. And so, if you are at the end of your life going to look back and go, have I spent my heartbeats effectively, impactfully, through those decisions? How does that affect the decisions you're making now?
Really powerful, really powerful. It's funny, I was only at a funeral yesterday, and what you described then around, you contemplate your own mortality, and that was definitely the case. I thought back to my dad's funeral, which is over 19 years ago now, and I sat there in that moment going, well, what would my legacy be? And at the funeral yesterday, my sister-in-law talking about her dad and how one of the real key things was like being authentic. He was authentically himself, and he gave his children full permission to be authentically themselves, and like they should at any funeral. They talked about the different challenges. He wasn't perfect, none of us are, but it was really focusing on those messages. And I think what you described there, it's like we don't have to wait till one of our parents passes or to funerals to have a think about our own legacy and what is the message, because that comes back to the word you used before, is value. Like finding that inherent value that you bring to the table. It's such a powerful tool.
Well, your values are given. What you bring to the table are your skills, your capacities, your capabilities, and you apply them in the environment. Your value doesn't change. So a really good metaphor is like a gold ring. That you can focus on your shininess, you can focus on your ability to hold a beautiful diamond, you can focus on your shape, your ability to fit a finger, you can focus on all of that. But at the end of the day, you get a mallet, whack a ring, burn, heat it until it becomes a lump of gold, and you know what? It's worth exactly the same as it is in the ring shape. And so the realization that I like to get across is you're the gold, not the ring.
Yeah, that what sort of struck me there is the ability for people to be able to articulate or express their value is the key part. Their value is there,
exactly,
and being able
right.
being able to share their value in a way that people understand and that they feel comfortable sharing.
Yeah. And then once you realize that you're the gold, not the ring, you can choose your shape. You can choose the shape of that, but the gold never goes away because that's you. That understanding allows you to go out there and perform and make mistakes. I mean, we have a saying that, my stake is a stake in the ground. It's a benchmark. And so actually making mistakes is the fastest way to learn. And I haven't found a faster way to learn yet. And I have looked at how can we be better learners. Making mistakes is in our world the fastest way to learn. So in our world, there's no failure, only feedback. And it's whether you're open to that feedback that you begin to get lost in the process. And so we have a saying at the coaching group, which is go ugly early. Get it out the way. Make all the mistakes ahead, learn from them, grow from them, and you'll develop into someone who is performing at a higher level of performance than others, because you allow those mistakes to shape you and shape your learning. Let go of the event, hold on to the learning, and then helping people release the event whilst they take the learning forward with them as a human being makes them more fully human from our perspective.
Yeah. When people are working on those different like events, those different memories, it's a good one how you describe that, because it's like you're not going to remove the memory. I mean, it may dissipate, but the memory's there. But it's like how you are looking at that value. What's your
Yeah,
belief around it? What's the value you're assigning to it? What's the
yeah,
story you're telling in your head?
yeah. We call it the frame. What's the frame that you hold around that memory? But because the frame determines how you experience the memory, not the memory.
Yeah.
And so what we do is we show people how they are framing it, the meaning that they're applying to it. We have them quality check that, and if it's not serving them, reframe the meaning around what it means, and take that meaning and therefore the learning that comes from that meaning and that frame with them, whilst releasing the old frame, which no longer serves or is even accurate.
Yeah, yeah, because our memories are wonderfully creative as well, aren't they?
They certainly are. They certainly are. Yeah.
When when you become a coach and a performance coach, from my experience, everyone I've interviewed has some sort of backstory around challenges that they've had to overcome that it's inspired them to want to help people. You mentioned like the extremes of you had a gentle dad that was opposed to all these things, but you also talked about that experience at Normanhurst where the
Yeah.
opposite was true. Was that the main story that you had to overcome, or was there something else that happened in your life that was a setback that you had to go through to then get to the point where you wanted to pass messages on to other people?
Look, as a kid, I was really pushed around, particularly back in high school, early high school days. I was a small kid.
Yeah.
Um, I was a pretty sensitive kid, and people decided that they were going to take advantage of that, and I got pushed around a lot. And I actually think that that facilitated me eventually going, no more. No one's going to push me around. And
Yeah.
so it really was a painful period of my life, but I think it was seminal in, I'm not saying it's good, but for me, the
Yeah.
meaning I made out of that in reframing that was that, it taught me to become more independent. And through that, I learned that I could stand up for myself, that no one was going to stand up for me. And I began to become more agent in my life, and I began to become more directive of where my life went. And I began to make difficult decisions and not let the thought of failure stop me from doing things. And so I think even though that was a painful thing to go through, and it is for a kid, and
Yeah.
and as adults we need to stand up. And my dad did that. He stood up and he went, you know what, if this ain't working for you, let's go find a place that will. And we found a school that I finished my schooling in that really did serve me. And we did it, he did it in a very gentle way. It was no aggression. We just said goodbye. We separated. I separated from school, found a school that really worked for me, that had teachers that were a lot more sensitive to kids like me, and really brought that out in me. So that was the biggest setback, I think. I mean, starting a business like the coaching room, coming from the corporate world, that was a really big step, and it was a very scary step. But it was one that I decided I needed to make for my own
Yeah.
growth and development, and one that I was going to make work. And that was over 20 years ago now. So
Yeah, yeah. I'd love you to share some challenges, because I talk to people a lot when they get to that point where they're like, don't love my career. It served me really well. I'm sort of tied to it to a certain degree, whether that's paycheck or identity, a word you used
sure.
before, or otherwise. I know it was
Yep.
massively challenging for me, but I was also of that same belief,
Mm.
still am. I'm going to make this work. I'm going to continue to make this work in whatever it looks like and continue to move forward. But it's massively challenging when it goes against all of, for most people, probably the language they heard growing up, the patterns that they witnessed, the behavior that they experienced. What did you do? How did you get through that time? I imagine you didn't do it on your own. I imagine you had support through that. How did you make that transition? What were some of the key learnings that you could pass on to the listeners and viewers today, Jay?
The biggest learning was a realization that growth doesn't occur inside of my comfort zone. So that, while I'm comfortable, I'm not growing. And that's my experience, my 20 years in working with high performance business people, sports people, is that realization that growth does not occur inside of our comfort zones. It occurs at the edge of our comfort zone. And so, discomfort actually means we're growing. So, what seems to be uncomfortable is actually forcing us to grow. Now, I then linked that inner game growth to physical outer game growth. And I had the realization that that's true in our physiology as well, that we can't grow physiologically. We can't grow muscle mass, for example, without getting bloody uncomfortable. If you want to go and do strength training and you want to grow, it hurts. People say, I don't like strength training. It hurts. It's meant to hurt. It's meant to be uncomfortable, because what that's doing is it's breaking down your muscles so that it fires out the lactic acid to get the proteins into the muscle to facilitate the growth. We can't become physically fit without pushing ourselves. We can't become, strong without pushing ourselves. The same's occurring on the inside, that growth happens at the edge of our comfort zone. People often say, surround yourself with like-minded people. Actually, we take a really different approach. Surround yourself with the people who piss you off most, so you can free yourself of them, so that you're no longer triggered by them. So surround yourself with arseholes and free yourself fast. Stop surrounding yourself with like-minded people who keep you in your comfort zone. Surround yourself with people who push and stretch the crap out of you.
Yeah.
And push yourself constantly, and get into being comfortable, being uncomfortable would be the greatest lesson that I have learned. And so, I work in the field of Formula One. I work with Formula One drivers. I work with Formula One teams. I work with rugby teams. I work with coaches, rugby coaches. I work with boxers and boxing coaches, swimmers. I work with wakeboarders. It doesn't matter what we're doing. The process is exactly the same. And working with all those people and business people has helped me understand that high performance comes from the will and the desire to really stretch oneself. And so that's true for me too, that I've over the years, I've put myself right out there. When I went and worked with the Waratahs and the then coach, Daryl Gibson, I had no training in rugby or high performance sport. I loved rugby. I've played rugby when I was a kid. I fell in love with the Australians in the like mid '90s when we
were good.
We won the World Cup in '99. Yeah. And I was working with Vodafone, who were the biggest sponsors of rugby. So I knew the players. I was connected with players, but I knew nothing about coaching. I knew nothing about the game. I knew nothing about really mental skills. But I knew a lot about human beings. And so I stretched myself to really push myself, to take myself and put myself out there. And it was damned uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Because the season before I went to work with them, they had their worst season on record. And I thought, well, can't get any worse. And so like, the following season, we took them into the semi-finals, so it got a whole lot better. And what we did made a difference. It worked, but it wasn't without a stretch. It wasn't without a lot of discomfort for me, and a hell of a lot of discomfort for Gibbo, and a hell of a lot of discomfort for the players. And Andrew Hoare, the CEO, he went through a lot of discomfort, faced a lot of things. The Israel Folau stuff was all happening at that time. There's a lot of discomfort in there. But you know what? As a team, as a brand, it all grew, dramatically that year.
And I love how you started that analogy with the creating more muscles. It's like it's actually breaking fibers of the muscle to create more. I think it made me think of like the broken finger I've got here, that where it actually gets stronger as a result of that.
Right.
And it's so true of ourselves.
Yeah.
We can stay in this nice little gentle comfort zone, but there's no growth there. There's no fulfillment. There's no meaning.
Right.
No meaning of quality. But the more you can get yourself out of that space. Now, I imagine as a sensitive child growing up that going through those different challenges would have been even more challenging because of that sensitive side, but growing up the same, because like it's the weight of that emotion can come crashing down. Again, for the people who are tuning in today, Jay, like what can you share a little bit about your story around that? Because I tend to have a lot of people that are following me that have that similar empathic capability, and how they would learn to navigate that in an easier way.
Look, I realized a while back when I look back on that upbringing and everything, that the one thing that really was the difference, that made the difference, is I embraced the downside. I embraced loss. I embraced hardship. I embraced it. I welcomed it in. And I did it fairly unconsciously. And I think it was because of my dad's very gentle approach to life that it just become part of it. It just become part of the unfolding, and the discomfort, I think I realized unconsciously, was a part of growth and development. And so I realized that what I'd done over time, because I did a lot of self-help stuff when I was in my teens and that, I really learned to reframe that and begin to embrace that and welcome it, and allow it to shape me. And that was really the biggest difference that made a difference, that allowed me to get through it. So in a way, the sensitivity was an asset that allowed me to sure, I took, went to Bunnings, got some concrete and hardened up as a result of it. But coming out the other side of that was also a much more sensitive side of me as an adult, as a man, as a father, as a husband, to be more sensitive. Although my wife would call me insensitive a lot, to be more sensitive to the people I'm working with, and genuinely compassionate about their plight, about their experience.
So not running away from that capability, but actually embracing it and seeing how you can use that to even greater advantage in what you're doing.
And helping people do the same for themselves, to allow that the vulnerability, to allow the sensitivity to come to the fore. It's okay. You don't have to harden up. You don't have to, push life away and become a hard person and, become a tough person. Actually, you can use that that sensitivity is a real strength. And it certainly is my experience that it is the difference that makes the difference.
Oh, so good. Now, you mentioned at the start around dealing with anger in different circumstances, something working with athletes that I know often stemming from that fairness element, that anger and frustration can come out of nowhere, particularly in the heat of battle, in personal life. What do you recommend for people, again, whether it's within their sporting or personal life, to be able to deal with those things that blindside them, that come out of nowhere, that create an emotional reaction when they're trying to stick to process, they're trying to be composed, and that just knocks them right off course?
So it's their expectations that knock them off course, not the event. And so when they hold an expectation that reality should go a certain way, and reality doesn't match that expectation, that is the single cause of suffering. And so expectations, the positive intention of an expectation is to guide and direct us to have a vision of possibility. But when we turn that into a vision of probability, we create a belief structure that we then project upon reality. And when reality doesn't meet that belief structure, we have a gap. That gap is suffering. And so, have expectations, don't have them have you. And see that an expectation is a structure about reality. It's a map. It's not the territory. When the territory begins to shift and diverge from that structure, it's not the territory that needs to change. It's the structure that needs to change. Excuse me, I have a cat that is just not going to take no for an answer. It just wants to come in. It won't be a tick.
Before you dive in, Jay, but my viewers are familiar with my cat coming in and interrupting my. It's usually my cat, and yeah, so it's not a very nice change. Sorry, proceed.
So it's the map territory distinction is that we create a map of how reality should be, but we mix it up with the territory, and we begin to think that the territory needs to match our expectation, our map, and reality's intelligence is always going to unfold in the way it wants to unfold, not the way we want it to unfold. So when it occurs, what we need to do is we need to adjust the map, not try and change the territory, because the map is simply a navigation device for the territory. If it's not working, change it. Like if Google Maps directs you to a brick wall, you don't rail against the brick wall and beat the brick wall down and yell and scream at Google Maps. You look for an updated map that's going to get you through the territory more effectively. So you might need to update your map, your Google Maps. You might need to change maps. But the realization is the map ain't helping me navigate the territory anymore. The map needs to change. And so seeing that means that stuff like fairness will fall into the background, and it'll be used as a guide. It won't be mixed up with the territory, and that allows us to be much more flexible in how we approach the territory, how we approach the game, how we approach the event, the umpiring, the refereeing, the crowd. We can't control any of that, but we can control how we map it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess I look at it, the difference that makes a difference from my perspective is that I work with a lot of people, and it's been my own experience, is being able to control emotions has been a challenge. And it's something I've worked a lot on because it's something I've wanted to master, and then being able to help people in that moment. But what about when you can do the mapping beforehand, but when they're in the moment and they have that emotional hijack, they have the amygdala hijack where they're gone to fight or flight. What recommendation do you have for them to be able to deal with it? Because I'm sure even the people that you've coached extensively would still have those moments. We see it on the TV all the time of athletes.
They do. They do, but over time with good coaching, those moments become fewer and fewer.
Okay, so let's talk to the ones who haven't done that coaching. They're in the moment. They're like, and again, I'm not just talking about sport here, but their day-to-day life, right? Like, because the people listening to this, they might be community sport, and they're reacting on the sideline to things, and they look back and go, "Oh, I wish I hadn't reacted."
So it's a process. There's no magic bullet, but there is a powerful process that you can engage in that over time will start to change how you see reality and the frames you're bringing that guide and govern how you make meaning, your thoughts that drive your emotions. So the first thing I teach people how to do is when that occurs is allow it to occur, welcome it in. It's just simply part of your processing. But come back to it when you've got time and the heat of the moment's gone. Now it becomes a learning experience, and it only becomes a learning experience if they will do the work to learn from it. And so the work is this: to determine for themselves what was the movie that they were playing in mind just before they experienced the emotional snap. What was the movie that they played in their head? What did they say to themselves? What visual movie, what soundbite did they play? What tightness did they experience, and the feelings in their body? Where did they feel them? And what was the meaning and the thinking driving that? And bring that into your awareness. Now, when you bring that into your awareness, what does that link to? What are you referencing from your past experience that drives that emotion? What are you referencing? What event, what experience, what memories are connected to that? When you can find those memories, you can find the meaning in the memory, and you can find the limiting decision you made about how you were going to respond when that happened again. When you can do that, you can unwind that limiting decision that no longer serves you, that has you snap. And so it's super surprising the things that come out when I'll go, and tell me about what happened, and they go, this, that, and the other happened, and I go, great. What was the feeling that arose? And they go, the feeling was frustration. And I'll go, close your eyes. I want you to go back inside, and I want you to find a really early single one-time event where you experienced that same frustration. And they go, oh, okay. And they'll go inside and they go, oh, God, I was a kid, 12 years old, in a soccer game. This happened, bang, and I decided that's never going to happen again. And I'm like, there it is. Yeah, so do you see what's playing out for you is when this happens, you're unconsciously linking it to that memory, and that decision that you made is firing your emotional response right now. Is that response serving you now as a mature adult? And they go, no, absolutely. And so what decision do you want to make around that? And when they make a new decision, it's not a limiting decision, it's a limitless decision. And so it's an unlimiting decision. And so that changes the nature of in that moment. When it happens again, it changes the nature of their response in that moment in the future through the decision that they made here today.
Love it.
So that's the process, but it takes work, right? And they've got to be willing to do the work. And one of the things I'll say to them is, you can't expect the pay if you won't do the work. You have to do the work. You have to do the reflecting. You have to do the journaling. You have to do the work. No one can do it for you.
Well said. I like a few of the things that you mentioned there, that the subtleties of what you were saying as well. Like, you got to welcome these emotions in. You have to have an awareness around what's really playing out. You need to look at the story, change the story, and then you can start to build new patterns that'll take you forward. Really good. Jay, you've been so generous with your heartbeats today and spending some of them here today. So thank you very much. And you got another generous offer for people tuning in today. So I'll get you to share that now.
Yeah, so we train neurolinguistic programming in Sydney and in Melbourne. We've probably been one of the longest serving NLP trainers in the country, and we quite easily be the largest trainer of NLP. We run about 3 NLP training programs a year in Sydney and 3 NLP training programs a year in Melbourne. We charge about $2,500 for that training. It's an 8-day NLP practitioner certification training. And for your viewers, we'll provide you with a $500 off that, so bringing it down to $1,949. And there's a code that you can use called E for Echo, O for Orange, 500. EO 500 will give you, when you're checking out, will give you a $500 off. And so if you did want to come and learn about this, for whether you're parenting a high performance child, whether you are a high performance athlete or you're a coach and you want to learn these mental skills, NLP is the place to start without a doubt.
Yeah, well said. And that is affordable given what I know is out there. And some people are paying much more for
Sure.
quality that's probably not anywhere near as good. So
Yeah.
thank you, Jay. That's very generous of you. And again,
And that's
thank you.
the coachingroom.com.au.
Nice. Thank you again for your time, your heartbeats.
It's been a real pleasure. Thanks, buddy. I've really enjoyed having this conversation, and the style in which you hold the conversation is different from pretty much any other podcast I've experienced. So well done, buddy. It's lovely.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And that's definitely the intention there's a
Yeah.
lot of podcasts out there, and my difference, right? Like to make sure it's a conversation about you and your wisdom and your story. And I really appreciate you sharing that today, Jay.
Thank you, buddy. Much appreciated.
Cheers. Hopefully after listening to that, you're already starting to think about the language you use and what you can do to change it. I'm certainly adding to my game plan some of the intricacies that Jay described in how to do exactly that. Now, if you want to hear more content like this, some extra content from the guests like Jay that I have on the podcast, jump into the Sport is Life movement. The link's there in the show notes. And if you want to get a resource to help you continue to change your language, then make sure you opt in for my training on how to journal. It's one of the best tools out there to start having that awareness around your language and starting to make the changes you need. You've taken the time to listen to this whole episode. Now it's time to take action. Commit to one thing you've learned today and make it happen. And to avoid any obstructions, join the Sport is Life movement by clicking on the link in the show notes.